Hello, everybody. We're just letting everybody kind of like filter in and come in, and we'll be getting started in a couple of minutes. It's lunchtime, giving everybody a chance to get settled and get in. So we're just gonna wait a little bit and get started at probably 2 or 3 minutes past the hour. Might as well start by sharing my slide deck. Let's see if this works. It works. Technology. It's amazing. So, Callan, I see you have the Aurora Borealis behind you.
I do, yes. This is actually my backyard. Not green screen at all.
Localized in your office at this time of year?
May I see it?
No, absolutely not.
No, no.
One of the best Simpsons gags ever. So, everybody, we are just giving until a couple of minutes past the hour to make sure that we give people some time to get here. So, we're just going to kind of vamp a little bit until then. The chat should be open. I see someone has posted in the chats. Yes. Simpsons jokes to start, a great sign. Yes. Classic Simpsons. Seasons 1 through 10, the best. So as everyone's been reminded in the chat, we are going to be using the Q&A function to receive questions. So if you can use that, we can definitely see your questions. If you post questions into the chat, we'll be seeing those as well, but it's a little bit easier for us if it's in the Q&A. So add your questions as we go, and we will make sure to get all of your questions answered. We want to be of service to you. So I've got less than a minute left before I want to get started, Callan.
Let's
You
do it.
feeling good? You
Feeling
feeling
great.
excited? Awesome. Awesome. To answer a question that I've been getting all week, the Captain America variant shield that I have is Captain Carter from the What If animated series. I've been getting a lot of questions about it this week. So it's a new accoutrement in my office. All right. We're 2 minutes past the hour. I'm going to assume that everybody who is going to be on time will be here. So let's get started. Anyone who comes late, this is being recorded. You're happy, we're going to be able to get that to you afterwards. So let's go ahead and get started. So hello, everyone. Welcome to our talk today. We're really glad that you're here. Today, we're going to talk about Emulsify and its impact on higher ed website development. First, before we get into that, I want to talk about who our speakers are today. First, there's Callum Mullaney. He is the engineering lead for Emulsify. In addition to his work, he also does work at For Kitchens as the senior front-end engineer, and he uses he/him pronouns. I'm Randy Ost. I'm the Emulsify product lead. I'm also the creative director at For Kitchens, and I use he/him pronouns. So, as we get started today, I want to start by saying that Emulsify is a free open source project. So everything that you see today is available for use right now. And if you're the kind of person who likes contributing back to open source projects, we welcome that. Emulsify is currently used by a few thousand Drupal websites. And there are agencies other than For Kitchens that are using it as the backbone of their process. So this is a good ecosystem. It's strong. There are lots of contributions back to it. And it is open source. So Emulsify at its core is a collection of tools with sensible defaults and assumptions to help accelerate development. So, like when you make a lot of websites, like an agency or a higher education institution, you start to know how you commonly set things up. And generally, that's how starter kits are born. Emulsify started back in 2016 when Drupal 8 came around. It was based on Pattern Lab and then was converted over to Storybook as the core component structure. We built it because we wanted to get a faster start on projects and we wanted to get a strong handle on accessibility. So, in recent years, we've been keeping it up to date over the last 8 years. As of last year, we integrated Figma into the mix so that we could include designers into everything that's going on. Um, as of today, we're connecting a Figma file to front end components and then wiring those components directly into Drupal itself, creating a nice kind of like pathway from start to finish, kind of like from farm to table, so to speak. So, what does Emulsify do, and what are some of the benefits of using Emulsify? And we're going to dive into the code and show you examples a little bit later. But Emulsify is built around the concept of component-led design and development. This is more commonly understood as like atomic design, basically anywhere where you're building small things that aggregate into larger things. This is the process by which Emulsify, or the philosophy by which Emulsify was built on. This by systematizing the work, it makes it easier to maintain and easier to update everything that's within that system. Emulsify can be standalone. It does not require Drupal to run. And so what this means is that if you install Emulsify and are using it as a component library for your Drupal sites, you don't have to engage a front-end engineer who knows Drupal. You can actually have a back-end engineer wire up the components, and it gives you a great deal of flexibility in what expertise you need for your front end. You can hire the right person for that work. And as I said, this can be run as part of a Drupal site, or it can be run separate and used to power multiple websites. So one example of kind of like breaking down and systematizing things, this example that I'm showing right here is a spacing system in a project that we worked on. All right. So what we did was we created, between the designer and the developer, collaborated to create a system that had all of the different sizes that the site would need for margins and padding and gaps, and created a system of spacing. So what this means is that as the designer and as the developer, we're working on this project, spacing could be consistent because when you're using these tokens, you apply them and you don't have to worry if something is off by a pixel, because if you've used the library values, then everything will work out fine. Now, I've done a lot of design debt reviews over the years. And before we started building Emulsify, I would spend at least a solid week working to correct misalignments and spacing issues in websites. And with design tokens, as shown here, and component-led design that we have in Emulsify, those design debt reviews, they take a fraction of the time, because I know that the front-end engineers have the systems to build what they need, and all I have to do is review it, and it goes along much faster. So the web development process gets streamlined dramatically. And while we're talking about designers and developers talking with one another, I want to bring out my next point, which is that Emulsify helps to improve collaboration between teams. So I've been a designer for more than 20 years. I used to make mock-ups in Photoshop. I used to throw them over the fence to a developer. And I've lived that life. I don't want to go back to it. What I want is what I have now, which is collaboration with developers. So one of the things that designers will do is that they have a desire to make everything custom and special. And I'm a designer. I do that all the time. I want to do that. But when you're working within a system that is component led and you're thinking in those terms, that helps designers and developers to understand that they're creating reusable patterns. And that means that instead of creating a dozen different types of cards for a site, or a dozen different types of buttons, we start to think about like what can be reused, and what needs to be created new. Now, there is still room for extraordinary design elements within the system, but now they work within the system. And so it by using component-led design processes, we're able to get fewer snowflakes. And when we do have snowflakes, we're able to invest more time in those snowflakes because we have built upon a strong foundation where a lot of questions are answered already. Like, what does a button look like? What does a card look like? So we have set up Emulsify so that designers and developers can iterate faster by working together. And the way that one of the big reasons for that is that we use design tokens. You may or may not be familiar with what design tokens are. So, design tokens are discrete design decisions, such as a color, spacing, a border radius. Um, all of these all of these different design tokens are defined and they are part of your brand palette. You have colors that you use on your website, you have fonts that you use, you have spacing. This is just systematizing it and giving it a little bit more purpose. So what we're seeing in the screen right now in the second column is that we have this purple value, which is set up in the hex, the 5E4DB2, and that's the hex color for the purple. And that's part of the brand in this example. We then give it a name as a base token called Purple 800, so that if we need to reference the color, we have a variable that makes a little bit more sense to the human mind. Like, I don't remember that 5E4DB2 is purple. It's much easier for me to think Purple 800. And then from that, we have what are the kind of like the core design tokens, the semantic design tokens, where we give it a name that denotes purpose. So for instance, in this example, it is color.text.discovery, which means that text that is in a discovery context should have this particular color to it. And by creating this design token, we are able to consistently apply that value that we've defined, which is that purple color, and it shows up in the right context everywhere that we use it. So if we follow the flow chart to the third column, at the top, that color value is defined within Figma, meaning that the designers are using that particular color in their designs. The next one down is code, VS Code, and we see that the token color.text.discovery is being used in the front end code with the same name and the same value. And then underneath that, in the browser itself, where it is being rendered, we are showing that, like in this instance, we're rendering it as a CSS custom property, which is defined as design system text discovery. And what this allows us to do within the system is if we decide that we need to change the discovery text color, we can make that change at the design token level. And that then is everywhere that that design token is used, that definition has changed. So instead of it being purple, if we wanted it to be green instead, we would change the definition of design token. Instead of saying purple 800, we would say green 600. And then everywhere that color text discovery is in use would be changed. And that would be in the Figma file, that would be in the front end code, and that would be in the final rendered website itself, meaning that we are creating these this system allows us to propagate out changes very quickly and semantically. And we're able to have control over that. And that by having these design tokens, we have a shared design language between designers and developers, and it reduces a great deal of confusion. So the next thing that I want to talk about is boosting accessibility and compliance and how Emulsify helps with that and impacts that. So accessibility is a major priority for anyone who is running any size website. There's been a lot of litigation around accessibility in websites. I'm pretty sure everybody has heard of the Domino's lawsuit. In 2015, there was a lawsuit. The National Association of the Deaf sued Harvard and MIT because they didn't have like proper captioning for online course materials. There's a lot of kind of like stick to like to want to be accessible and be compliant so that you don't fall for lawsuits. But accessibility isn't just about preventing lawsuits or protecting yourself. It's also about making your site easier to use. I personally view it as a moral imperative because it benefits everyone. One of the examples that I like to call out are curb cuts in sidewalks. This is a very common example of an accessibility feature that benefits everyone. Curb cuts are the little curves that allow wheelchairs to ramp up and down, off and on of sidewalks. And while this was the main reason for those changes to be made, another group got a great deal of benefit from this, and this was parents with young children who are pushing their children in strollers, because now instead of having to like kind of like lift it up to the sidewalk or have it bump down, they had a nice smooth scroll on and off. And so by making sidewalks more accessible for wheelchair users, it made it more accessible for everyone and everyone benefited. The same is true on the web. If you make your website more accessible, people will use it more. People will be able to use it more. And as we all know, accessibility isn't just about people with permanent disabilities. It's also about people with temporary disabilities. Someone who maybe is having a headache and having a hard time seeing. Someone who maybe broke their arm and can only do things one-handed. There are lots of temporary disabilities that go into like using the web. Now, Emulsify, we have, because we have such a focus on accessibility, we have a lot of accessibility testing baked into the tools that Emulsify uses. So, for instance, we run tests to measure against WCAG 2.2 AA and AAA. And at the very least, we may be at WCAG 2.3. I don't remember if that's the most recent one that came out. But anyway, we stay on top of the WCAG rankings and the automated testing because we want to make sure that everything that we're doing is going to pass those tests. So like shown on the screen right here is an example of showing 6 past tests. Making sure that elements have sufficient color contrasts and a variety of other things that can be automatedly like tested for. Now, there are things that you have that you want to make sure that they're accessible, but you can't actually test for it. It's not something that you can do programmatically with code. You have to actually test with real people to ensure that accessibility. What we've done in the past is we have a component library that comes with Emulsify, and you can use it or you can create your own. But the one that we've used, we have people with disabilities. We engage with them to make sure that it works for screen readers and that it works for keyboard users, and that those components out of the gate work. And then if we make any big changes to them as part of the project, we have it reviewed again. But generally, like the accordions that we have and the menus that we have in the system have been well tested and vetted, and we can go on with confidence that those things can be used. The same is going to be true of a component library that you would create for your system, is that you can have it tested for screen readers and keyboard navigation inside of the component library. And when you do that, you then have confidence that that component, when used throughout tens or hundreds of sites, will be accessible and will be compliant. And so that means that you're doing a smaller amount of testing, a little bit more rigorously on like a component set. But when you have that testing done, you can then duplicate it and move forward with a great deal of confidence. So the last point that I want to make before we start looking at code and looking at some things is that we want to help ensure consistency across departments. So web teams are the ones who are building the sites, but they aren't the ones using them. I worked at the University of Pittsburgh for 10 years, and every department, every center, every school demanded their own website, each wanting a unique look for themselves. Like I said, I worked in the Office of Public Affairs, and we wanted everyone to embrace the brand. And so there was this push and pull about like how much freedom do they have? How much branding are they required to have? And we've helped a lot of universities solve this problem at Four Kitchens. The most common solution that we found is to create a freedom of expression, like into the design system, fully support some variations and components that people want to use. And basically, when you like release it into the wild, listen to users, and whenever they have suggestions for new components, add that new component to the library. So at this point, I'm going to show you an example of an Emulsify library, and then I'm going to hand it off to Callan, who's been very patient and waiting for me to pass the torch to him. So let's see. Just got to grab a different window for sharing. All right. So what we're looking at right here is we are looking at an Emulsify instance. This site is publicly available. This is let's see. So this is a component library, and what we did was the intention with this component library is that we are going to have two tiers of control to control branding for the users. We're going to have one tier is going to be in the Drupal site itself. And inside the Drupal site, an administrator will be able to pick like major changes. So for instance, if we look at this header that's up here where it says global setting, if I decide that the navigation, I want it to be centered, I can make it centered. I can change the header theme to a couple of different approved themes. I have this is a mega menu. Maybe I don't like the mega menu and I want like more of a regular menu. I can make these changes at the Drupal level whenever rolling out the site or choosing to update the site. All right. And then within the site itself, within components, there are choices that can be made to help what a thing is supposed to look like. So for instance, I think it was cards I wanted to look at. So here's postcards. There are options like if you want to have cards with images or without images, that's a choice that can be made at the content level in this site, because some groups will have a lot of images, some groups won't. And so that's something that's within the control of content editors. We can choose to show or hide things like tags. We can show categories and affiliations. There's a lot of different controls that we have that are offered within the website itself. But here within Emulsify Storybook instance, we have all of these different controls for testing and reviewing. If you have people on staff who have a tendency to write really long headlines, you can actually go in here and copy and paste in one of the really long headlines and be like, this content is just too long. We need to do something about this. You can invite them to come here and see how their stuff looks and maybe get them to edit it down. I don't know. Content's always a big fight. Anyway, you can come into Emulsify and you can play with all of these different variants that are here, and so that you can make sure that everything is kind of stress test the way that you want it to be. Like you can even change the date here. We can change the date to the future, which is 2025 instead of 2022. Anyway, so this is an example of an Emulsify instance that's running out in the wild. I'm going to stop my sharing, and I'm going to pass the baton over to you, Callan.
All righty. Let me go ahead and share. I'm going to share my full screen so we can all see what I'm looking at because I want to share multiple browsers here. As Randy mentioned, there are there are multiple ways that you can install the Emulsify, an instance of it. So you can use the Emulsify UI kit to create your starter using Emulsify in it, or use Composer if you're want to install with Emulsify within a theme. Earlier this year, we uh, shifted gears a little bit with Emulsify. Originally in the 4.x and previous versions, Emulsify was a starter kit. This means that you would install that separately or into a project and you would start modifying that directly. This worked out great, but what we found is for long-term support, it became very difficult to issue updates to previously generated Emulsify instances. So what we've done here this year is we've created, switch to the right one, a Emulsify base theme. Now, what this base theme does is allow us to issue updates for Emulsify, as well as integrate what we're calling Emulsify Core. I'll share that in a little bit, and basically generate as many themes based off Emulsify as you need for on a per Drupal instance. As I mentioned, this implements Emulsify Core. Emulsify Core is basically what a separation out of all the configuration and tooling that you'll need. So Storybook and Webpack compiling and all the various Alley plugins and everything that you need to basically start developing. What this looks like here is we're going to go through an install process. So I'm going to go to my base theme documentation here, and we're just essentially following these steps here. So here in my VS Code, we have a Composer installed Drupal instance
Hey,
here.
Callan.
Yeah,
Callan, can you increase the font size of
yeah.
both your browser and your code editor?
Is that better?
One more each.
All right. All right.
I think that's much better. Thank you.
Yeah. So here we have a Composer install of Drupal. We're using a starter kit that we use at 4Kitchen. It's called Sue, but it's essentially just adds additional modules and kind of sets things up for us. We're going to go through and run the install process here. So you can see I went through and I required Emulsify, the latest 5.3 version. It will install all the dependencies. These dependencies, for instance, for Emulsify tools and the components module were already in our install, so you can see they were already there. But running this one command will get us everything we need. We will then enable the theme. We're using Lando here, but you can use ddev or just run drush directly on your Drupal instance. So we'll install the Emulsify theme. And now if we look at our themes folder, we have our admin theme gin, and then we have Emulsify base theme in place here. At this point, we are ready to create our custom theme that we want to start for our project. So I'll use drush to drush Emulsify, and then I'll name my custom theme UI kit demo. So we'll go through and enable that. You'll see that it does generate our demo kit here. And if we look, we have a custom folder generated. We have the UI kit demo here, and we are ready to go in terms of start developing. So there are a couple ways that you can now move forward. First one here is we can start creating our own components within our theme here, or we can use Emulsify to pull in various systems. So if I do Emulsify system list, I can see the available component libraries. We have Compound, which was our first component library. This was unstyled components focused in on accessibility and interactivity and making sure that they were primed for any kind of custom project you want. And then we have the UI kit, which is what Randy has been talking about today, where that has the Figma integration. So I will do Emulsify system install Emulsify UI kit. That will generate the UI kit here. We can ignore that error. That's a local issue that I'm having here. And that will install your components locally. Otherwise, with that, you can also look over. I'll switch to a fully install version here that I have. Let me increase that here a bit. Where we have our custom UI kit in here. I installed the UI kit, and that will give us our source folder with components that come with Emulsify by default. Also, we can install additional components with the UI kit, all described in the documentation here. And you are ready to start developing. One great thing about this install here is, as I mentioned before, we are using Emulsify Core. So if we take a look at our dependencies here, I'll ignore that. We only have and need Emulsify Core as our dependency. So this makes our package.json a very simplified JSON file, but all the dependencies, like I mentioned, Storybook and Webpack, come with Emulsify Core. They're pre-installed and they're pre-packaged with all the configuration that you would need. If you do need to modify any of that configuration that comes with Emulsify Core, under this config folder here within your custom theme, there's Emulsify Core, and you can go through and extend things like StyleLint if you have different rules you want to apply. Your Alley plugin for Storybook, ESLint, various Webpack for Babel and Post CSS configuration you can extend, as well as Storybook. If you want to create your own custom theme for Storybook, you can go in here and do that. And that just overrides or layers on top the existing configuration that you would get from Emulsify Core. So a very flexible system here. And it's meant to give you the best defaults. You can start developing right away. But if you have specialized needs for anything, you can go through and modify what Emulsify Core gives you by default. What we're going to look at here is, as I mentioned, I am running this within a Drupal instance here. So we have a Drupal theme set up here with some pre-wired components. And what those pre-wired components look like, I also have Storybook running, is in the templates here, we have some template files set up. We have, let's look at a node teaser. We have a node teaser here that is pre-wired for our card component. So you can see here that we're just embedding our card component, and then we are piping through the various values from Drupal into our cards. So the label, the URL to the node, specific value from our field teaser, and then the card variant that we have set up here. And then for images specifically, we like to use the markup that Drupal gives us, but you can wire those specifically if you need. But we just pass through the actual raw value of that to the card. And once that's in place, we have our blog here set up with some 3 posts that we have, as well as the events page. Again, simple teasers. We're using the same exact cards, same exact display. And what this looks like on the Emulsify UI kit Storybook side of things is we have our card here, and you can see how this matches exactly what we were getting piped through Drupal. Now that we have kind of these 2 connections in place, Randy, my project designer here, he's going to go through and he's going to make a change to a token and maybe even add a different card variant that I need to consider too as my next step of developing this project. So I'm going to switch this back to Randy to show what the details for that step is, and I'll come back after and show you how I process those changes.
Awesome. Thank you, Callan. I'm going to go ahead and share. Here we go. All right. So I'm in Figma, and in Figma has community resources. Inside of the community resources, if you, apparently I cannot type today. If you search for Emulsify, you will find the Emulsify UI kit. And if you click on it, you have the option to open it in Figma. And whenever you click on that, it'll ask you like, where do you want to open it? What team you're part of? And it will create a copy of this file. I've already gone in and created that copy of this file for the webinar today. And the file itself here, it mimics the layout that you saw in Storybook. as well. So for instance, we have like all the different tokens that we can take a look at as they're used. We have the components, accordion, announcement, block quote. And we also have a couple of example pages. As a designer, I like to look at the example pages a little bit more than the components. And this is making use of a plugin called Tokens Studio. All right. Figma does have native variables. We have not released a variables version of the Emulsify UI kit yet. We are working on that. We have it pretty far along, but we haven't unveiled that yet. If that's something that you're very curious about, reach out to me and I'll be happy to show that to you. But for now, we're sticking with design tokens or with Token Studio. So if we go to resources and then plugins and then Token Studio for Figma, okay, we open this up and it'll take a moment. And we can see that in the file already, there are a lot of tokens. Okay. And each of these tokens, once again, are small, little discrete design decisions. So for instance, we have sizing here with the different sizes. We've got spacing. We have all these different colors that are defined here. And that falls into three groups of tokens. Okay, plus a fourth group just for the storybook instance. But the three groups here are what we're really concerned about. There are the global tokens, and these are all of the kind of like the house styles, the brand styles. This is your sizing and spacing scales, your color scales, border radius, border width, opacity, typography choices. This is kind of like strong fundamentals that tie into your brand. And then a layer up, we have semantic tokens. And these semantic tokens are tokens that they don't have, like their value is something from the global set. Okay, they don't have their own hex color or their own value. They use references to the brand. And what I mean by that, for instance, if I change the display here, so we have our primary colors, and I know that this is small and maybe hard to see. I actually cannot make this larger, so my apologies. But here, color primary default. If I right click and edit the token, you can see I can edit the name. And because there are curly brackets around this, it tells Token Studio that this is a reference. And right now it's referencing color Emulsify Blue 600. And I'm going to go ahead and cancel that. And then these other colors here, for instance, this light color, in this instance, I'm telling it to lighten that color by 20%. And so it's going to dynamically change the primary color into lighter colors and darker colors. If I wanted to, I could specifically pick colors. But for this example, I just have them kind of like building off of the primary color. And then we also have some semantic colors for like the body text, the lighter body text for things like eyebrows, the heading color text, and white for reversed instances. We've got some warning text color, link colors. I'm not going to go through everything. But then a little bit deeper, we have these component level tokens. And at the component level in accordion, we're inheriting definitions from the semantic level. And the reason that we do that is that during our build process, what we found is that some of those choices that we make at the semantic level, like for instance, if we have a primary, secondary, and tertiary color, and we decide that the call to action button is going to be the secondary, we might go through a design and it might mean that the button color really should be the tertiary or the primary color instead of the secondary color. And this gives us a way to override that cascade. So for instance, with the accordion, the designer can come here and say the header color, I want this token to be color text heading, or if they wanted it to be, it could be heading lighter. All right, I'm going to cancel that. And so that allows us to have fine grained control over the designs and have changes propagate the way that we want them to. So Callan just mentioned that, like, yeah, he needs some new designs. The out of the box Emulsify isn't what we're going to want to do. So what we need to do is we're going to go to semantic, actually global first. And here in global, I have some colors. I've got some golds. I've got some blues. It's under WUP, which is for Western University of Pennsylvania, our fictitious university that we do all of our work for. Um, and I think this WUP Gold 600 would make a really nice primary color for this. So I'm going to go to semantic. I'm going to go to primary, and I'm going to edit the token. And in the token's definition, I'm going to curly bracket and I'm going to type in gold, and I'm going to scroll down here to 600, and I'm going to select 600, and I'm going to hit save. And so you can see that the primary colors have all changed because of dependencies. Body lighter and body heading were also based off of primary colors, so they inherited differences. And throughout our example pages, you can see that it inherited those colors as well, which means that if you have a sub brand, an alternate brand, and you want to give people options for colors within your brand palette, this is a way to do it. Like it all uses the same components, and we'll show you how that works. So the other change that we want to make is we want to change the font family. So right now our font family is Enter, which is a beautiful font. I love it a lot, but we're going to make some changes to it. We're going to go here and we're going to say that we're going to redefine the secondary from Sentinel to PT Serif. I think that's the one that I installed earlier. So I changed the secondary, and not much is changing because not much depends on secondary. Right here in semantic, our font family is defined as the body and the heading fonts are both primary. I'm going to change that. I'm going to change the heading to call on the secondary font and hit save. And then I'm going to do the same with the body. And I'm going to, there we go, pull in secondary, and I'm going to hit save. And I'm going to hit apply to page. And we should see, we've seen some of the changes here. Like right here, this has changed. Sometimes it has a little bit of trouble inside of Figma applying all of the tokens. We're doing it live so you can see where things mess up. But we can go in and override those very easily as a designer to make them adhere. I'm not sure what's going on with this small little thing, but the components that we have, like this card right here, you can see that the text has updated, and it has updated on the vertical one as well. So with these changes in Token Studio, how, as a designer, am I supposed to get this to Callan so that Callan understands what those changes are? Does Callan have to go into Figma and look at everything one by one? No, Callan would not like that. And so with Token Studio for Figma, we can go into the settings and we can add a new sync provider. All right. I know we're for kitchens and we're sync experts, but it's a different kind of sync. We can choose to use like JSON bin, GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, Supernova. You can choose any of those options as your sync provider. And if you choose GitHub, you will, I'm going to open up this, you'll have to fill in some information. So this means that your designer does have to have a GitHub account. Don't worry, they are pushing code, but there are safety nets. So you have to name the sync provider in the connection. You have to provide a personal access token. How to get the personal access token is in our documentation. You have to get the repo owner and repository name. So for kitchen / Emulsify UI kit demo. You tell it what branch you're going to be pushing to. Right here, it says main. Our recommendation is to not do that. No one wants designers pushing to the main branch or develop. So typically what we do is we create a branch called Figma and we push to Figma. And that way, like it's very obvious which branch is the designers, and those changes that get pushed can get pulled in by the front end engineers in ways that don't make things go crazy. Then the token storage location, you have to give it a path within the repository for where the tokens are going to go. And here we've got a string that answers that question. And we don't use a base URL. And then you hit save and you have a connection. With this connection, we can go back to tokens. Down here at the bottom, you can see that there's this little blue notification dot that says push to GitHub. Well, if I click on that, it is actually going to it's going to push to the repository. It tells you where it's pushing it. You have to enter in a commit message and you tell it what branch you're pushing to. Now, I'm not going to actually push to the branch right now, but the branch that we used earlier today was called alternative, and pushing to that pushed the changes that Callan needed. Callan, do you want to show them what the JSON looks like and what happens next?
Absolutely. Let me switch back over here. All right. So, Randy, my designer, pushes up his branch. I don't really review it in detail. I just trust that he changes the right things, and I consume that branch into my theme here. So it pushes to our theme. This is what the Figma export looks like. So you can see it's a kind of a nested JSON file with global spacing, value changes here. Pretty complex thing that happens. We do have we wrote some additional scripts that transform this document or this JSON file into something that we can actually pull values from. So we kind of have this intermediate step here of if colors are there, let's process those tokens into hex values. If if pixel values are passed to the JSON file, we want to convert those to rems, something that's a bit easier to theme with. So you can see that we've processed this. And now, now that we have kind of a cleaned up JSON file, that's something that's more specific for the web, I can run npm run token. I think it's tokens build. We'll see. There we go. So we ran our tokens build here. It lets us know, and we have a tokens SAS file that's been generated. And what it does is compile all that JSON structure to CSS custom variables, and that's what and assigns them those values here. So you can see we have a bunch of colors. We have rems in place for gaps and border radiuses in place. So now this is something that I can use. And when I theme projects, I just use this variable. And if Randy or my designer changes something, I can ensure that I just recompile those and those values will change. And I don't need to go through and hunt and peck through a Figma file or do anything. So now that I've recompiled my tokens, let's take a look at Drupal, and I will refresh. And there we go. Our values have now changed over. I didn't have to change anything on my end. I just use those custom variables there for background colors and text and spacing. And as Randy's Figma file showed, he changed a lot of stuff to gold, and that's all great. But one thing I did notice about that Figma file is he updated a card design, and we have a new card that we want to consider here. So we added a new vertical card. This vertical card now has a background color, and the variable for it, I've pre-looked this up, but Randy's pretty good about naming these variables here, is card color BG. Let's see, let's give it some padding here. This would also have a variable, but in this case here, we're just going to use a random variable here just for theming purposes.
You're killing me, Callan. You're killing me.
I cannot type. And we'll give it a border radius. Why not? This one does have a variable. So global radius and margin bottom, just because. One rem. So now I just need to run my develop command here. That will turn, that will boot up Storybook for us. Give it a second here. And if I've preset up my stories here, so I have a card, vertical card story, I preset up a horizontal card here. So my vertical one, I'm passing a card modifier just called vertical. So then that matches my styles here. Let's save that. And if I look at our card, my backgrounds are not applying. 1 second here. That's because I think I didn't assign these variables correct. Let's look at that. There we go. So now we have our card vertical, we have our horizontal, which is the previous version and the opposite. And now we need to go in and reflect this in Drupal. So one thing that we need to look at here is I have a template file in my folder here. We have a content set up here for a node teaser. You can see that this node teaser, let's make this a little bit smaller here, is using the card. I'm passing the horizontal, but we don't want to have this apply to events. We also want to have it apply to our blog here. So let's go ahead and we'll create a new template file. Node news, I think it's news post. I'm trying to memorize this by heart. .html.twig. We'll
I
paste
don't
in
think the underscore needs to be there. I think it should be a dash.
I think you're right. All right, so we pasted our previous one. Let's pass in a different modifier here. We'll save that on my separate screen here. I just, when in doubt, always clear Drupal cache. Address CR. And once that clears, we'll refresh this page. So our events shouldn't change here. Give it a second. That's good. Those look the same, but our blog now has now changed. So we now have our vertical one applying because I've changed the node template. I've rewired it and passed a different modifier that now matches. And if we look at our vertical card here, and if I just do something, because everything is now connected, I can even, I'm going to break this and make it look really bad because why not? Drupal, Storybook, and everything is now connected. We have our change here that breaks a lot of accessibility. And if I refresh on Drupal side, always clear your cache. You'll see that the connection now is made. You can see changes in both, and Storybook is our source of truth that represents all of our changes and our components, and they are wired directly to Drupal. And now we can make whatever changes we need in the future for this. And that's how we get everything set up and wired together.
Awesome, Callan. Awesome. So, Callan, there's a question. It was asked a little bit earlier. I wanted to save it for now in case, maybe this was the right time for it. Can you speak to some of the Drupal site building paradigms that best align with Emulsify, like paragraphs, layout builder, Gutenberg, as they apply to reusability between Drupal sites?
Yeah, we actually use layout builder and paragraphs. So it's Emulsify is agnostic. It all depends on how you like to wire your components or your entities. You can use completely custom entities that aren't using a module and they're built by a back-end developer. As long as you have those node templates, or not node templates, as long as you have those twig templates available, you can wire them to any component and bring in whatever field values you have. And how I showed earlier where I had a card heading variable for my component, I just wired it to the node title or the label of the node there. So it really doesn't matter your structure on Drupal side of things, as long as you're either back-end developers good at wiring components, or you're familiar with it as well. As long as you know those field values and the template that you'd like to target, you can wire it to any component that you need.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. There's no more questions in the QA, so I'm going to do a last call for questions. As I wait and see if any of them come up, I want to remind you that, or Thank you for coming. I want to remind you that Emulsify is for bringing together designers and developers and product managers and marketers and chief technology officers to bring together and unify the experience of building a website, managing a website, deploying a website, promoting a website, making things easier for the end user, making it easier for your development team. It's yeah, it's a honestly, like I use it on my personal projects as well. I think it's really good stuff. There's another question. How do you explain component driven development to marketing people? Good question. And then I see Elaine has a question too. So let's answer this one. How do you explain component driven development to marketing people? Um, the Lego metaphor goes a long way. Talking about like, we create the right custom Lego blocks that allow us to build the thing that we want to build. So, at first blush, everybody who plays with Lego blocks remembers like the square bricks, the rectangular bricks. And, you think about building all of those or building with those, you start to think like there are custom shapes that I want that I just don't have whenever you buy like Legos in bulk. But when you buy like specific Lego sets, they have specific Lego pieces that help craft the thing that you're trying to craft. Like there are Lego pieces built specifically to like round edges or allow things to move and wave. And you want to make sure as a marketer that you have like any of those tools that you need can be built and deployed very quickly. Because by having that library available to you, you can spin up marketing sites faster and more likely you can spin them up yourself instead of depending on development. Because if you ask a developer for a page, if they have a component library, they can just put it together really fast, hand it off to you, and you can edit the text. Or in more instances, like a Drupal website using paragraphs really allows you to build it yourself. And that's one of the big things about this approach is putting the hand power in the hands of the site editor. All right, next question. I saw a lane in the chat, and then we'll get to the next question in the Q&A. How can I effectively present this process to a non-technical client to help them recognize its value? That's a great question. And it's always kind of a challenge when you have a set area of expertise, but it's tough to communicate that because you really have to be kind of like in the thick of it to understand those terms. The first thing that I would do is I would not use any like jargon. Anything that's if it sounds like an industry term, I would not use it. I would try and find a more like plain way to say that. To just say like instead of saying we're going to use component led design processes to do things, like their eyes are going to glaze over. If you tell them like we want to create like a toolkit to be able to put things together faster, that makes more sense to them. And you can also say like, let's trial this and try to, let's try it in this little area and see if it makes us faster. Like for instance, the spacing example that I showed earlier, that to me is a big deal because getting spacing right on a site when it's wrong, everyone knows it, but designers especially like feel it in their bones whenever there's a little bit of misalignment. And if you can get spacing right like that, that really helps. I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but I would use plain language and I would talk about the benefits, not the implementation details. If they want to know the implementation details, then get into it, but wow them with the results that they should expect from this kind of system. All right, we've got another question here in the Q&A by Yohel. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Can you explain in the simplest way possible the concept of token? I have always had trouble explaining to non-technical people the concept of token. I run into this problem too. It's pretty esoteric. The definition that I give people is that a design token is a discrete design choice. It is a color. It is a font. If you've ever gone to a hardware store and looked at paint chips, each paint chip is a design token for color. And usually then I kind of build upon like that analogy. Like, okay, so you have these paint chips for color. You also have paint chips for spacing. And so like you kind of like go like, okay, so if you go to the lumber section, there are 1x1 boards, there are 2x4 boards, there are, a variety of different size boards, and that's your spacing token metaphor. And so like that helps people to envision it because it anchors it to something that they've experienced, and it's something that they can visualize, and that it usually, like, if you can help in those ways, it helps it stick a little bit better. So that, I hope, helps you out. All right, last call for questions because we've got less than a minute. All right, we don't have any questions. Everybody, thank you so much for attending today. It means a lot to Callan and I. We love sharing this stuff and we love talking about it. In fact, if you would like to have a one-on-one session to talk about Emulsify, talk about component-led stuff, talk about design tokens, you're going to get a follow-up email and you're going to have that opportunity. You'll be able to book a call. We'll answer your questions and help guide you. We'll point you in the right direction. So if that's something that you want to do, I look forward to hearing from you. If not, I hope the rest of you have a wonderful day and a great weekend. Oh,
Thanks,
will
everyone.
will we be posting the recording? I believe the intent is for us to post the recording. So I'm going to say yes. And then if I'm wrong, you can hop on LinkedIn and yell at me. All right. Thank you all so much for coming today. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Randy.
Goodbye.